Hi Dovan. So we are now on to textbook 4B, chapter 8, where we are learning about decimals. So let's have a look at our in focus task. It says, look at the two numbers shown by the parts shaded in pink. How are they related? I'd like you to have a look at the two squares and their shaded parts. We know that one square that's fully shaded pink is 1. It means that this is one whole. Okay, so we've already been told here this stands for one whole. So what about the other square? Does it also represent one whole? This square does also represent one whole, but a whole of the square is not shaded. A whole of the square is shaded here, but not here. So how much of the whole is shaded? Pause the video now whilst you try and work out how much of that square is shaded. So the first thing we need to do is work out how many parts the square is divided into. So you need to count these sections. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The square is split into 10 equal parts. So this links into our fractions that we've already learnt. So how many parts of the square is shaded in pink? We have 1, 2. So 2 parts out of 10 are shaded in pink. What do we call 2 parts out of 10? Think back to our fractions, how we would write 2 parts out of 10. Two out of 10. Okay, that's how we write that as a fraction. So how would we write 1 part? It would be 1 part out of 10. How do we read these fractions? We have 1/10 and 2/10. Remember, we did lots of practice in class with saying the th sound when we were learning about fractions. So it's not 2/10s, it's 2/10ths. Okay, so remember that. There is another way of saying 1/10 and 2/10, and that is using a decimal. So we can write 1/10 as 0.1, and we can write 2/10 as 0.2. So what would 3/10 be? It'd be 0.3. Okay, the dot is called the decimal point because this means we are writing it as a decimal because it has the decimal point. Okay, so that's really important when we come to do our guided practice. When they ask you to write something as a decimal, we know we have to write it with a decimal point in it. So if this is read as 1/10, 0.1 is also read as 1/10. 2/10, 2/10, 3/10, 3/10. So we know that 1/10 is the same as 0.1 is the same as 1/10. Okay, right. I would like you to have a look at this task here. It says compare 0.1 and 1. Compare the two squares. Which is the larger number? Is it 1 or 0.1? And how do we know? Pause the video now whilst you give that a go. So let's have a look. When 1 is divided into 10 equal parts, each part is worth 0.1. So we know that 1 must be larger than 0.1. The pink in this square is much larger than the pink in this square, so we know that it must be bigger. We also know that 1 is 10 times as much as 0.1. We have to colour that amount of pink in 10 times to get the same as the 1. So do you know how many 0.1s make 1? how many of these did I just say? 0.1 times by 10, and we have 1 whole. Okay, so now it's time for us to have a go by ourselves. We've got section 3 here, and what you need to do is write the number presented in each diagram as a decimal, which means it needs a what? A decimal point. Okay, so it tells you how much is coloured in, but it doesn't tell you how to write it as a decimal. Okay, so have a go at these 4 questions, writing them as decimals, and then we're going to share our answers. Okay, so let's see how we got on. So A, we've got 1 whole. So A, 1 whole as a decimal would stay as 1. B, we've got 3/10. 1, 2, 3 out of 10. How do we write 3/10 as a decimal? If I know I've got to have a decimal point, it is 0.3. And then for C, we've got 9/10, which would be 0.9, my decimal point. And for D, we have 5/10, which should be 0.5. So well done if you got those correct. Let's have a look at the last task we have. It says, write each number shown by the shaded part as a decimal. So it's the same task as before, however they are not represented in squares, they're represented in bars. Okay, it's told you at the top that 1 whole means that all 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, when all 10 are coloured in, that's 1 whole. Okay, so it's the same as the previous activity, counting the squares and writing them as a decimal. Pause the video now and give that a go. So, for A, how many squares have we got coloured in? How much of the shape is coloured in? We've got 1 out of 10, so that's 1/10, which is written as that. However, it's asked you to write it as a decimal, so we can't accept that answer. 1/10 as a decimal is 0.1. Okay, so that's the correct answer. You're allowed to work it out like this first if you want to, and then convert it in a decimal if you find that easier. B, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares coloured in out of 10. But remember, that's not our answer. We've got to convert it into a decimal, which is 0.7. C, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 10 coloured in. So 4 out of 10, that's not my answer. We're going to convert it into a decimal, which is 0.4. So these are all decimals. That's what we had to write in. Well done if you got those correct. At the moment, it is just counting the squares and being able to write it as a decimal. Okay? Right. If we're writing in tenths, we know that there's always going to be 10 squares, because that's what we're measuring. So, now it's time for you to have a go by yourself. So it's completing worksheet 1, pages 1 and 2, which is attached on the Google Classroom. If you have any questions, do feel free to post on the stream and we can try our best to answer it. Good luck with our first lesson on decimals, everybody. Can't wait to see how you get on.